Okay, should we get started? Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So last week we were looking at the instance, one of the last few instances pre-prophethood that was a major event in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When he was 35 years of age, there was a rebuilding of the Kaaba that took place. Right? Do people remember this? And so within that, there was a few different reasons as to why potentially the Kaaba was being rebuilt. There was flooding that had taken place. There was just a deterioration of the building on a whole. Somebody had robbed the Kaaba. So it's a very sanctified space. One of the places that they would just place the kind of wealth of the city was inside the Kaaba because they didn't expect people would be robbing this place because of its sanctity and the deference that they had to it. And we talked about what kind of came about, these tribes coming together, the chieftains of the tribes, and having hesitancy in the rebuilding of this, along with kind of argumentation that kept coming up again and again in relation to who was going to be responsible for what parts of the rebuilding of the Kaaba and how it is that they would relate and connect to each other. And so what we want to be able to do is kind of look at a couple of the instances in a little bit more detail relevant to the Kaaba itself, but to understand a little bit more about the historical context of the Kaaba in relation to what's taking place right now and why is it so important. How is this kind of a pathway to revelation coming again? And what's going to happen from here going forward? If the Prophet ﷺ is 35 years old at this time, how old is he when he receives revelation? He's 40. Right? So there's not that much time now between when he receives revelation and this last kind of major event that's taking place. And the nature of what's happening here societally, if we look at this more from a sociological standpoint, who was the last prophet before the Prophet Muhammad? Huh? Yeah. Right? Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him. They weren't 5 years apart or 10 years apart. Arguably, there's about 6 centuries between the time that Isa alayhi salam is in the world, Jesus, peace be upon him, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is in the world. 600 years is a long period of time. Do you know? When you think about kind of the drop in a bucket, that's the history of this country and when it was founded and when it was established and how much time has passed since then. And if you can imagine what 600 years ago looked like, right? We're talking about being in the 1400s. What does this mean comparatively? It's like worlds apart. Do you see? And understanding this now within the context of the Meccan society, not post-prophethood, but pre-prophethood. This instance at 35 years of age that's showing this tribalism, that's showing kind of the argumentation, the need for this really kind of facetious mode of dignity and honor that if I don't get what it is that I'm saying, we're going to fight. There's going to be bloodshed, these kinds of things. The society on a whole wasn't in a place where it had exposure to a form of revelation, but the world on a whole also did not have exposure to a revelation for 600 years. This is very distinct from previous modes of revelation because the prophetic engagement of revelation with the Prophet ﷺ is not the initiation of revelation, it's the initiation of a final revelation, but there's so much revelation that takes place prior to that. And you can go to a place like Palestine. May Allah grant them ease and end the occupation that's taking place there. If you've ever been there before, has anybody been there before? No? Nobody in this room has been there before? Are you kidding me? Yeah? So, you want to make sure you're going to these places, and you want to make sure that you're learning what our history actually is. Otherwise, somebody's going to tell you what your history is as a way to get you to buy into what is just validating and justifying their kind of agenda, so to speak. If you go to Palestine, it's crazy just the number of prophets that are associated with the land of Palestine and who's buried where and what you can actually experience. Very distinct from when you go to Mecca and Medina, which are beautiful in and of themselves, but it's just a very different reality. And you can see now the distinction in experiential knowledge, just how close in time all of these prophets were. Versus now, there's Jesus, the son of Mary, peace be upon them both. And then for about 6 centuries, there's no one and then the prophet of God. Does that make sense? There's a chapter of the Quran, Surah Yasin. Some of us might know it. And there's a verse in that chapter that talks about that the warning was not done to your fathers. And this is why the verse says that they are from the ghafilun. They are in a state of heedlessness. Because they wouldn't get anything. Do you know? If you can think back to the eldest person in your lineage, you didn't live with them 600 years ago, right? The oldest person you probably have spent some time with, potentially some of you, as a grandfather or grandmother. They might have been 70, 80, 90, maybe even 100 years of age, but think about their entire existence prior to you being there. You're like a baby, 5 years old, 10, 20, 30. They have lived multiple centuries in order to get to that 600-year mark. So for this duration of time, this entire population is getting no instruction necessarily. There are individuals who are present that adhere to previous revelations, but they're not in the elite in Mecca, nor are they necessarily in an abundance of numbers. Because when the Kaaba is being rebuilt, it's all the chieftains of the Meccan tribes that are coming to do this. They're not saying, let's get this Christian person to come or this Jewish person to come. Why is this an important thing to think about? Well, where do you draw a sense of ethic and values from? And there's like an abundance of reasons as to why we could just think about the sheer impact that it has, that between Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad, there's this much amount of time. But for us, religion isn't just about the practice and the ritual, but it's about a testimony of faith, the shahada, that then informs a sense of ethic and value. The belief is meant to inform decisions and choices, right? La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, there's no God but Allah, there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah, is supposed to be present enough within you that you're not going to lie because you believe there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah. Like you understand from a God-centric perspective how this informs ethics and convictions and values and in turn decision-making and choices. Do you see what I mean? So in this society that has not been touched by divine revelation directly in this way for quite some time, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is still a trustworthy person, and his people still value integrity and trustworthiness. right? In the Quran and the Prophet manifesting the Quran, they call you to like universal values and ethics. Do you know? And so in this instance that we're looking at, the Prophet of God comes into this masjid, and he's in a place where, as he's in the masjid, in the Kaaba, and the people rejoice at his coming, as-sadiq al-amin, radina, they're joyous because the trustworthy one has come. Now I want you to think about this in a couple of different frames, right? One, these people later on, some of them are going to become his staunchest of opponents, but they still trust him enough. They believe him in what it is that he's about. His character, his integrity makes him a source of recognition that there's validity to what this individual has going on. And I want you to think about it in two different frames. One, even the opponents of the messenger of God believed him. So where does the disconnect come in terms of Muslims actually believing him? Do you get what I mean? Not believing in him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but believing him. Believing him when he says, like, this is something that's good for you. This practice is good for you. This way of life is good for you. This is how you do this. And then at the other frame of it, not just about believing him, but being in a place too where the initial interaction with this man is one around integrity and honesty. So how come people don't believe us so much these days? Like, where does that disconnect come in? Do you get what I mean? Because the primary engagement with Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was that he was an honest human being. So much so that these people were going to go to conflict over who gets to put the black stone back. And then they pray in their own version of prayer to the Lord of that house, the Kaaba, saying whoever comes in next is going to be the one that helps us mediate or decide. And they're happy that the Prophet comes in. Where does the disconnect come in for us? And you got to think about it, not in a way that's self-deprecating, but where does the transition come in that the initial state of existence, even 5 years out from Revelation, they still are believing that he's honest and trustworthy, right? He's been married for 10 years. He's got kids who he's buried. He's outlived them. I don't know if any of you are married or not, right? Or you've seen marriages that have like their real life experiences, healthy experiences, unhealthy experiences, do you know? Still, after all of that, and we said over the last few weeks, from 25 when he gets married to 35 when the black stone is placed back, there's not anything else that's a major life event because he's just focused on his family. And so even a decade later, they still see him as being the trustworthy one, right? So what's happening that's changing that for us? Where does it come into play? And I want you to think about it through not a self-deprecating mode, but how is religion taught to you? What are you given when you're giving an insight or an interaction to what this deen of Islam is actually about? Right? Has anybody ever said to you, La ilaha illallah is meant to be a way to inform these kinds of things? How does it influence ethics and values and convictions, and then in turn practice and the purpose of practice and the reason that we practice? The first thing I'd like you to do is just turn to the persons next to you. What do you think has shifted in a pedagogical sense, in a teaching sense, in the way we're exposed to religion, that it's not only because, but also, we can say as a given, we live in a supremacist, anti-black society, capitalism, this and that. These were people who were greedy about money. They still saw him as a trustworthy person. They valued his conviction. where do we find from this moment in the Seerah a need to also be people of conviction? And how do we get to that? Not in an idealistic way, not in a romanticized way, right? Not in a way that makes devoid reality, but this deen is about character and character development, right? La ilaha illallah, if you really believe it, should make you a good person, not a bad person. La ilaha illallah should not translate into saying that this then justifies me treating people like garbage, right? I'm going to use La ilaha illallah as a mechanism to like live in a bubble. No. So what's going on, right? So if you could turn to the person next to you, there's more people who trickle in. We want to also just kind of move in here a little bit. It'd be helpful because we're spread out a bit, just for me, so I can kind of see. If you guys want to be the aunties that lean against the wall, free. You're only like 10 years old. Just keep it in mind, right? But where do you think the shift comes in that we go now from a prophet of God who is believed even by his staunchest of enemies? Because it doesn't stop. Even after, like, revelation comes and they don't like the prophet and they're fighting him, they still, like, people are still giving him their possessions to hold on to because they know he'll return it back to them. Do you know? So where does that shift come? And this is what a lot of us looking at this part of the Seerah is about. Where does the shift come? When Hajar, peace be upon her, is left with Ismail, peace be upon him, and the Kaaba, like, is founded in this place in Mecca where the wells of Zamzam are stepping forward, and the Jurham come when the well of Zamzam comes forth, and they negotiate as a tribe of Arab men with this elderly black woman. So somewhere a shift comes around race and gender that gets us to the place that we find ourselves in today, right? And it's important for us to understand and acknowledge this because here too, the shift is coming from the standpoint of character and ethics. You know, a big challenge that exists, especially amongst young Muslim men in this country, is just an absence of adab. There's like a high presence of disrespect. Do you know? And we want to be able to figure out where this comes from because it is the milestone of this religion, right? You have a prophet who people didn't even know his name was Muhammad, but they knew of Al-Amin. So why don't people believe us so much? Like, where did the difference come in? What's shifting that has brought us to be now a people that we're more so doubted? And not even from the outside in, right? How many Muslim people do you hang out with that you know they're not going to keep a promise to you? That you doubt them when they speak. And not because you're arrogant, but you just know that they lie and they gossip. And you want to objectively understand where it comes so then we can piecemeal through the prophetic biography that is the lived experience of the Quran. It makes it concrete, right? There's nothing that's deniable here. These people who are the elite of Mecca, they trust the messenger of God. So we following his footsteps should also theoretically be people who are trusted, right? So where does that disconnect come in? If we can talk about that for a few minutes and then come back and discuss. And we come back and discuss, I would love for people to like actually express the ideas, right? Don't just talk to each other and then be hesitant. You should want to talk about your prophet, right? The way that you want to talk about whoever you love. And you got to overcome what shaitan has within you. So you normalize the experience about speaking both about Allah as well as Allah's messenger as a way that allows for you to increase love for God and love for God's messenger, right? You ever hear me sit and talk about my kids, right? You were here, for those of you who were here on Monday Halakha, my kids were all running around here. All I did was talk about my kids and my wife. Do you know what I mean? Because I love them. Why would I stop talking about them? Do you know? And then my love for them helps me to understand love of God. Both like love towards God and love from God. Do you get what I mean? Right? So you want to silence whatever it is that creates anxiety. Don't feel like you should only speak when it makes sense that you're saying the most right thing, right? And this is going to be a pivotal variable in the development of our individual Islam, this sense of like character, ethics, values. So where does that disconnect come in, that shift? So we can shift back to where it's supposed to be and think about it deeply from like multiple facets. Do you know what I mean? Right? That's not just a rant that like, yeah, people are bad and terrible. We know that the world is devoid of ethics, right? And this is important to understand because sometimes light is what's needed to recognize darkness, but sometimes you need darkness to also be the mechanism that helps you to see what is actually light. Do you get what I mean? So the world is full of liars right now, and it's blatant. But then shouldn't the Muslims of all people be the ones that are known for their honesty? So where does the shift come in? Do you see what I mean? If we could talk about that for a bit, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Wait, did they tell you how much Miller?
Yeah. You have to reset it. You just said you have nothing.
Oh, that's not true.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I have nothing probably for today. Did you get it? One
I
today?
got it. No, they said I had to eat. I had one.
No. Did you get one on my card?
No, didn't work.
Yeah, because maybe I probably already used 10 today. Because I took, like, Danish used it twice. And then I took Rueda and 2 other people, and I got one for myself. And I think some other people might use it, right? Because somebody said this morning you could only use 10 in a day or something like that.
Yeah.
So I might have already used 10.
Oh, because I thought you was telling me in general.
I'll double check, but I definitely should have more.
Because that happened before to me.
Yeah.
Where I know I had some, and they said that I'm none, so I had to reset it. So it could be that too.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see.
Yeah.
I'll check in. Sorry, man.
Well, no, it's okay.
Do you want to grab something?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah? Okay. Good. Okay, so what do we think? Where does this shift come in? Because clearly, like, this is something that you hear again and again. Do you know? But the translation, in terms of now 1.8 billion people in the world who follow in the footsteps of this man contemporarily, and over 14 centuries of lived tradition, like, what's going on that there's a shift here? Do you know what I mean? What do you think? What do we talk about? Yeah.
I just think that like a lot of us who are like born into Muslim families, we're just like taught rules and regulations like, oh, you have to pray 5 times a day, we have to fast in zakat, fast in Ramadan, we have to pay zakat. We're not really taught about like who God is, or we're also not taught about the ethics. I feel like our emphasis when we're born into Muslim families is like our practices. Like there's more emphasis on that. That's why there's less emphasis on, ethics, like being honest.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, to add on to that, also we talked a little bit about like Sunday school, like you mentioned, and how in Sunday schools you just literally learn how to pray and like, the Quran, how to read the Quran and stuff, and the alphabets, and obviously that's important, but like the kids are not taught, okay, the Prophet was trustworthy, the Prophet was kind. It's good to smile, that's the sunnah, right? And kids are really mean sometimes, so teaching those things, those qualities, and just character, mercy, forgiving, not breaking a promise, all of that stuff is like missed, like especially at a young age. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
So, to my friend over here, like, if we went deep, but basically, what we kind of talked about is that the century that we live in, the modern times that we live in, have given us a false idea of the reality, in the sense that, for example, taking the social media as an example, sometimes, like, we think that, like, just making an actual post, and we should do posts, we should spread awareness, but sometimes we just stick to that post alone. And then it gives us a false idea that we're actually bringing change. But actual change, instead of just bringing awareness, means you should take like actual action. And the Prophet ﷺ himself was involved in society. He didn't just speak up, he took action as well. So I think the times that we live in, the social media, because we utilize it so much, we think that with just a tweet or like a post, we're making a difference. And then we fail to ingrain ourselves in the society and to bring this change. So I think the Prophet taught us that one, not just to talk, but to actually take action. So that's gonna.
Okay, are you gonna say something?
Kind of what you said about social media, like lack of guidance, influence, change people. Because like, let's say you're the only good kid in a class of like, or anywhere, like 20 people. If we grow up in an urban area, well, I grew up in an urban area. So when you're around urban areas, it's kind of, you get misguided real easily if you don't have a person who's guiding you. And especially if you have parents who work a lot, they don't have to be there to guide you. So your morals, your ethics shift to another type of morals and ethics, which becomes the streets or the bad ways. But when you get older, hopefully
So what's the point of a prophet? Huh? That's what the prophet does, right? And this is why that second question is important. These people who were his staunchest enemies, they believed him. Why don't you believe him? And thinking about it at that level of what gets in the way, right? A idolatry of the self, or, all kinds of different things. But believing in is not the same as just believing. Do you get what I mean? So the Sunday school teacher isn't teaching something, right? The elders are not doing this. The emphasis is on this and that, but you have at your fingertips right now access to more information than any people in the world ever had. So individually, you got to think about this, that these people believed the prophet. Would you believe me if I told you there was an army behind this cliff waiting to attack you? Yes, we would believe you. They believe him. They believe what he's saying. So can I, as a Muslim, at the stage of life that I'm in, get to a place where once it's now acknowledged that I actually do have an elder that's a guide, that I can turn to the Sunnah and implement it, not just in terms of the outwards and aesthetics, which are a part of it, but it's not it absolutely. And if I'm not conscious about what it is that I'm actually taking as a guide, directly or indirectly, if I'm going to choose, why would I not choose this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is in that second part of that shahada, Muhammad Rasulullah. So la ilaha illallah has to inform, and Muhammad Rasulullah has to inform. What gets in the way for me not choosing the sunnah, and to not think about it in this just kind of way that is acknowledged in the responses? If I'm just giving rules and rituals, then that might be just what it is that I know of the sunnah. But here we have an example. And for the last 3 months, we've been talking about this man's life, alayhi salam, as somebody who is just beautiful in his character, somebody who is kind and generous and compassionate. Guys, if we move in this way, people who are coming in to pray, they'll have ability to come to here. So if we can just make room and shift in this way, is that okay? So we don't want people, especially, we're doing a winter clothing drive. You can see these boxes on this side of the room. So it's taking up some space. So we're just kind of conscious. If you see someone come in through the door, just please tell them to come pray there, because it'll create two problems, right? One, if they're blocking the door, then someone can't walk past them. But two, we don't want people to become uncomfortable, right? There's a lot of room in the front of the space. Jazakallah khair. So these two questions go hand in hand. A potential, it's not the only answer, but one potential as to why people don't believe us as they believed him is because we don't really believe him. In the sense of like following what he is saying to do. Do you know? When you make the choice of being kind to the orphan or not being kind to the orphan, how do you do that? Like, think about it creatively, right? Visit the sick, honor the elderly. Do you get what I mean? It's not rocket science, but it becomes atypical in a society that is egocentric. So there's a link in these two things that has to be distilled. Maybe people don't believe me because I actually don't believe him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not believe him by lip service, but how do my actions, my choices, my decisions demonstrate it? Do you know? The hadith says the best of you is the one who greets who they know and greets who they don't know. You can be intimidated. There can be social anxiety. That's fine. Some of us just don't say salams because we're full of ourselves. And the conversation can only be one that has movement forward when I'm willing to actually acknowledge it. Why do I feel comfort and familiarity only with people that I have that interaction with? And what would it really take for me to like sit in a room that has this many people and be bold enough to just extend this greeting, but to see it as something that is not categorically about goodness that's relative to, hey, you're good because you're a doctor. Where does it say this in the hadith or the Quran? All of you who are in the room who are doctors, you're good, but all of you who are not doctors, you're also good. You're good if you're married, and you're good if you're not married. You're good if you have a house, you're good if you rent. You're good if you're one of our brothers and sisters who are asylum seekers and migrants that are homeless, sleeping in this cold right now, that we're collecting like this stuff for, right? And I'm going to say this to you because I love you. If you believed Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you would have already gone to your closet and figured out what you would have brought for somebody who's sleeping in the cold. If you didn't know that we were doing it, that's fine. But if you knew it, right? If you know, at Jummah time, we put the QR code up to call electeds for a ceasefire, and you're not doing it, a part of it might be that you don't believe the Prophet. You believe something more than you believe the Prophet. Do you get what I mean? Circumstances might make it difficult, right? I'm going to Egypt on Sunday, and whenever I've traveled anywhere, Morocco, Turkey, etc., you all have been here for a while. You've seen like the campaigns and whatever else. I've never had this many people actually say to me, can I go to Egypt with you also? Right? Because people really want to do something for our sisters and brothers in Palestine. And I wish I could take all of you, but I can't. That's not my decision. Do you know what I mean? But I want you to think about it through the prism of what it means to understand the love that you have for those people and how it challenges now to a love just for people generally, the way the Prophet tells you that this is a conditional part of the completion of your iman, of your faith. Do you get what I mean? And starting to deconstruct, like, where am I taking my mentors and my guides? Who is it that is informing me? And this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, think about what this moment is. Can you let me tell you, right? When you all say it's so nice you're going to Egypt and you're helping these people, and mashallah, when you're in charge, you get like the benefit of the accolades. You got to also deal with all the just clutter and nonsense that comes up. This guy said this to me, and that guy looked at me weird, and that man said salam to me. You think he wants to marry me? No, he just said salam to you. Like, that's all it was. That doesn't mean anything else, right? But in being able to understand kind of what goes into this, the Prophet knows that these people trust him. And then he also experiences them abusing him. And then he still comes back to Mecca and forgives all of them. Do you get what I'm saying? Why would you not want this person to be somebody that you take as an exemplar? Not just in the performance of the Sunnah prayers, which are important to do, but in the entire embodiment of it. And this is where these things are not just platitudes or cliche statements, but there's truth to them. To know him is to love him. What do you know about your Prophet? How are you learning about him? This is why we're doing this in this way, but an expansive understanding. And to dissect, what do I actually believe then? Not do I believe in. If I say, do you believe in like justice? Yeah, like you believe in justice. It's an important thing. You know, I'd be like, no, I believe in injustice. Do you know what I mean? But how does what you do demonstrate that you don't simply believe in the Prophet, but you believe him? You don't just believe in Allah, but you believe Allah. When Allah is telling you that this is what this will yield, this is what this will yield, right? Like, it's not something that is not lined up for you. Lying is haram. Why do you lie then? Gossiping is haram. And in the same way, like words of upliftment, glad tidings, right? Give people greetings. You know, my son and I were walking down the street the other day, and we're walking home, and there's like a big stick in the middle of 24th Street, and he moved it away, right? And he was like, Baba, we should move sticks out of the street. And I was like, well, Kareem, like, this is a hadith, right? You know, right? And he was like, yeah, Baba. You know what I mean? But in being able to understand, the idea of that hadith is that you actually move the thing out of the way when you're in the street. Do you know? Because the obstacle in the street is causing detriment to people in some capacity. My son and I in the dark almost slipped. Who is expecting walking through the middle of Manhattan that there's a giant tree branch suddenly on the middle of a block? Nobody's thinking that's going to happen. Our trees are these things that have to be held up with other pieces of wood because they're flimsy trees stuck in the thing, right? Like, nobody's thinking that. Do you know what I mean? How many people do you think walked past that tree branch and did nothing? My 8-year-old, who does not know the hadith, right? Why did he do it? Because he's got innocence to him. Do you get what I'm saying? It's instinctive. At some point, bitterness is going to set in, and tiredness is going to set in, and anger is going to set in, and irreconciled emotion is going to set in. And there's going to be justifications. That's when it's that much more important to believe the messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in what he tells you is good for you and good for others, and what he calls you towards. Do you get what I mean? And his staunchest of enemies is in a place where they still believe him. They know that he's coming in and they're doing this exercise. The black stone is put in the middle of the sheet. They all lift it up. Nobody's saying, maybe this man Muhammad is going to only favor this person or that person. Maybe there's a doubt that we should start now kind of pushing amongst people. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? And so these two things become really important to understand from this moment in the Seerah. These people who are willing to mistreat anybody, they just take him at face value. And then it brings to them like a closure and a benefit because they're taking instruction from somebody who's a good human being. And even them in that place where they are burying their daughters alive, they launched a 5-year war that ended with them doing what they could have done right in the beginning when we talked about the Fijjar Wars, right? They're in a place where they dishonor people of racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, like women. Like, that's just what they do. Sheer disrespect. They can still see the goodness and beauty in the Prophet of God. Do you get what I mean? As a Muslim, you got to be able to see that and tap into it as a source on a philosophy of life. And one of the things that you want to make sure you do, don't let anybody take the Prophet away from you. When I sit on stages and I'm with speakers who say to an audience, how would you feel if the Prophet came into your home and saw what you watched and heard what you listened to and this and that? And then when I get the mic, I say, don't you diminish my Prophet's value based off of your insecurity. Because my Prophet would not walk into somebody's house and start pointing out what were perceived inadequacies. His sunnah was to find what was inherently beautiful within people and empower them based off of that. And he would do that for each one of us, undoubtedly. This is why you want to follow him. And not just believe in him, but believe him. This is where you have to graduate and have evolution in the sense of what this religion is about. And it has multiple dimensions to it, outward and inward, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, not just the starting point and the stopping point with fiqh, but it's supposed to be bringing you to something, right? And if your practice of Islam is making you a jerk, like whose sunnah are you following? Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And if your mind is taking you automatically to other jerks in your life, that might be because people have hurt you. And I'm sorry that that's the case. But some of us are also thinking about other people because we still haven't learned how to be honest and vulnerable with the stuff that we bring into other people's existences. Do you get what I mean? Someone else being bad doesn't mean why I'm not doing the good I can do makes sense. Do you get what I'm saying? They're two different frames, right? And so here, the messenger of God, he is again demonstrating, and it's only 5 years out from Revelation. He's not a little kid anymore, right? On Monday, those of you who were here, you saw my son walk in and out and in and out. Nobody was paying attention to me when this boy walked in and out. Little cute kid, little smile on his face coming in. Everyone's distracted. That's not happening here. The Prophet is now a grown man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has done business with these people. He has lived with them for 3.5 decades. They have been with him through a lot of different things. And they still are in this place. You see what I mean? Okay, what I'd like you to do is take 2 minutes. What are you taking away so far from this conversation? What is it bringing up for you? Any thoughts, any perspectives? And then we'll come back and we'll talk about the history of the Kaaba in terms of its rebuilding, and how that's relevant to this conversation also. But go ahead. Okay. So, what are some of the things? You can come pray up here if you want to. If you guys want, you can come up here. Yeah.
It reminds me to bring that balance between faith and intellect. So as much as we're believers of the unseen, we should use our intellect to understand why we are the believers of the unseen. Why should we? What? Similar to the point the brother mentioned earlier. So why should we? And then how can we? And then why should we believe in Allah and then His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And how do we enact it in our lives?
Other thoughts? Yeah.
I just sort of thought of, to the last question, I'm sort of tying this in, but of why, what was the shift of why people believed the Prophet? And I think it's because at every opportunity he was in Bridgeville, he didn't build up walls. And in every story that I've ever heard of the Prophet, that was a commonality. And I remember the one that's top of mind is the one where he would pass by the old lady who threw trash at him. And then one day she wasn't there and he was asking where she was at. And it was because she was sick and he went to take care of her. And it's just, he always did the, maybe not the hard thing, but the easy thing would have been to double down and be like, I'm glad she's sick. You know, that's what she gets. She's a mean old lady. You know, I hope she's sick forever. You know, keep going. But he always found that common thread, even if it was just a little thread, and pulled on it to show that, look, this person is also human just like I'm human, and builds a bridge out of maybe the tiniest thread. And I think that's why people believe him. You know, for that 3.5 decades, that's what people observed of him. Regardless of their differences, there was always a bridge there. And to the first question of the shift, I think now I'm just talking from my opinion, but I think a lot of issues stems from tribalism, and everything is an offshoot of tribalism. And it's so easy for humans to continuously other ourselves from others, instead of looking for the commonality. And for me personally, the way I try to combat that is always reminding myself that at the end of the day, I'm going to be dirt in the ground, the same way this other person will be dirt in the ground one day. Regardless of anything else, their status, wealth, whatever, maybe they're poor, maybe they're rich, whatever, I can walk, they're quadriplegic, whatever, they'll be dirt and I'll be dirt. And we're the same in that way. And just, that's how I always try to find that common thread.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
One thing that really resonated was how you mentioned about not diminishing the Prophet's Muslim's value because of your own fears or your own insecurities, and kind of putting yourself out there despite how people may have treated you or despite what you've been through, and just being courageous no matter what in order to follow the Sunnah in the best way possible, and just being mindful of how you treat others in that way.
Yeah, and different parts of the Sunnah, right? So like the praying of your Sunnah prayers is going to also help with like the Sunnahs attached to etiquettes and character. These are all connected to each other. Do you know what I mean? Just like all of you is connected to the rest of you, so too is all of the Prophet of God connected to the rest of the Prophet of God. So what he does in the day is going to impact like what happens in the night, and vice versa. Yeah, go ahead.
So like the brother just mentioned about tribalism, I think maybe there's wisdom in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not having a father, because we all consciously and subconsciously use our father as like the ceiling. So my dad's a good guy, he did this, so my ceiling is like dad. So.
Yeah. And this is what you want to think, like, critically, right? In a way that's not just unnecessary pursuits of feigned profundity, but like reflect, contemplate. Do you know what I mean? Because within it, you're going to find notions that could be easy to confront, as well as things that might be difficult to confront, that says, like, well, why am I the way that I am? And the parts of me that are great, and the parts of me that are, like, we have foster child, Amaya, some of you met her. Whenever I ask Amaya, she's 5-year-old, like, Amaya, baby, how are you? She's like, great, right? It's her favorite word to say. And she says great like 20 times a day in every way, right? May Allah make us all feel like that. But in thinking about this in this way, you are a product of the yesterdays you've lived. They don't have to define in a way that holds you back what tomorrow will look like. But some of it's going to have to be in a place where you're also able to look at somebody else and just to start thinking in this way, right? Like, the Prophet could be who he was because of the presence and absence of elders in his socialization. So not just lip service, but when you say, like, yeah, my exposure to Islam was based off of these people when I was younger. So what do I do now to shift if I feel like I'm not going down that trajectory? Do you know what I mean? Because then it all becomes connected. Because whether you're doing it consciously or not, when you hurt someone, the hadith says, the haram is creating like this dark spots on your heart. May Allah protect us from it. And then we're trying to figure out, like, why don't I feel anything on the prayer mat? Yeah, the world sucks and like it's tough. But if you're gossiping a lot, it's going to impact your heart. If you're lying a lot, and this is not like a mode of let me throw my back against the wall. If you mistreat people, you do not honor their rights. Do you know what I mean? The way that we're built, even just chemically, do you know? The chemicals that release like these happy feelings within us. Endorphins and serotonin and oxytocin and dopamines, right? These two, like dopamines and endorphins, they're like selfish mechanisms. You need yourself only to release these things, right? Serotonin is like the leadership chemical, you know? You need people's respect and admiration towards you. This is why, there's a reason why you have a graduation when you graduate. Do you know what I mean? Right? Because they're not just sending you your diploma in the mail, and you feel validated walking across the stage, smiling, and then parents feel good, right? There's reciprocity. That's serotonin coming out of you. The oxytocin is what's attached to love. When you hug somebody, you hold someone's hand, but also when you engage in an act of kindness, an act of generosity. Dopamine, you can get just by like hearing your phone vibrate these days. It can be addictive in a different way. You know, it's something that can come from other things, but it's also something that can now be manipulated to pop up and can just be a reason. You're not addicted to it because you like to scroll. You're addicted to it and you hold on to it because it gives you that little jolt of this like happy feeling, but it's not in a productive way. Do you get what I mean? Endorphins are like what mask pain when you're exercising. Do you know? So if you've ever run, does anybody here run? Yeah? No one? No, do you run? Yeah, right? You run. Do you ever hit a runner's high? Right? What does it feel like when you have a runner's high?
Amazing.
It feels amazing? Yeah, you know why? Because the endorphins are going crazy in your body, right? But what they're doing is telling your body, you don't hurt right now. So the, like, flip all of a sudden from this miserable, you know what I mean? I used to run track, and I hated long distance running, you know, and I'd run with people. You ever see someone when they're running, it's just like ugly running, right? You're like, dude, this is so sad to watch. You look like you're in pain. You're like, you're about to fall, and then suddenly you hit that moment and you're just coasting. you want to build a lot of what Allah has wired you to be built around, which one of the most impactful releases is through acts of kindness and compassion and love. This is just how you're built. Even if you don't buy into the rest of this, physiologically, this is how God made you. When you do nice things, your brain releases this inside of you, and it makes you feel what you feel when you do nice things. Do you get what I mean? So the Prophet's always doing nice things for people. Do you get what I'm saying? And it's not like through an addictive nature of dopamine jolts, but that oxytocin is just like spreading. You know, when you can be happy at somebody else's happiness, that's a remarkable thing that escapes many people. When you can feel sad when somebody else is going through difficulty and not let them be alone. And this is what this man does consistently and constantly, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How does it not have impact back on his heart and then the hearts that he's engaging? Do you get what I mean? So they believe him, and think about the connection. Why don't people believe us like this anymore? Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. So before we shift into what this like last 5 years looks like before Revelation and what the Prophet is doing a lot, there's a solitude that he seeks that eventually brings him to the cave of Hira, Tahannuth, right? And we'll talk about that next week because it's an amazingly important spiritual practice that if you were to buy into it, because if you believe the Prophet of God and you see what he is consequentially, this is a key practice that now creates within him this state of balance. He's in a place of homeostasis quite often. Even when he's pushed to his limits, he goes to Taif, the people abuse him, right? It's not a joke. They abuse him. And he's not in a vacuum. Think about when you're running on empty and then something terrible happens. Work is hard, stressful, I lost a job, this happened, that happened, and then parents say, you can't marry that girl. You're already running on threads, and then just everything falls apart. The Prophet has witnessed his people get abused, boycotted, and killed for following his teachings. He goes to Taif thinking they'll welcome him, and the chieftains command the children and the servants of the tribes to run him out. It's not in just minutes. This takes place over a long period of time. There's a lot that's going on there, right? When he goes to gather himself at the outskirts of the city, turns to Allah, like, have you forsaken me? It's a beautiful dua. When we get to that point, like next semester probably, like it's very profound, the dua that he's making, but he's like just devastated in this moment. And then the angel comes. I'm the angel of the mountains. If you command me to do so, I will crush these people. No, let them be. Perhaps the generations that come after, they will understand. His emotional recovery time is amazing. There's no retribution. There's no bitterness. It just happened. The narrations say what he's wearing on his feet are actually becoming hardened to the soles of his feet because of the amount of blood that's coming out of his feet. Do you see what I mean? Right? This is what the Sunnah can offer. Contentment in a world of chaos. It doesn't mean you don't feel sad, but the sadness doesn't ruin you or destroy you. And then you don't have to numb the sadness with drugs or alcohol or food or sex. You get to a place where you have healthy relationships with these things. And your stomach and sexual organs or emotional angst and anxiety are not the decision makers. You are the decision maker. Do you see what I mean? And this thing of honesty becomes the base of all of it. It's going to be hard for someone to trust you when you lie to yourself. Do you get what I mean? It doesn't mean you do it purposely. You could do it as a defense mechanism. People could have treated you like garbage. I'm sorry that that's the case. But at some point, you're going to have to look at what's really creating these obstacles and then be able to identify them with people in supportive environment and atmosphere that love you despite who you are, at your best or at your worst, and then equip you to get to a place where you have the healing that you're entitled to. Do you get what I mean? Okay. So when we're looking at the Kaaba now, just so we have this kind of in mind, because there's another beautiful thing that happens in relation to the Kaaba. These people have built the Kaaba. It doesn't look the way that the Kaaba looks today. We said this last week, but it was shorter and it was kind of more rectangular. At one end, it curved. Remember we said last week that of the parameters they imposed on themselves through their experiences with the rebuilding of the Kaaba was that they would only use pure resources and wealth, right? Not like pure gold, but nothing that was from the acquisition of something of a vice, you know? They weren't using like bad sources of money. They were using money that was derived from things that were good, not things that were not good. And they run out of money. So they can't rebuild it fully to its capacity. It stays in this way for some time. And the Prophet ﷺ, he tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that when he went into the conquest of Mecca, that he wanted to actually rebuild the Kaaba in its original form, rectangular, a door here and a door there. That what would happen, people would come to pray, and they'd go in one door, and they'd pray, and then they'd go out the other door. That's not what the Kaaba looks like when you go there these days, right? It's just the door that you see on one side. When you do the tawaf around the Kaaba, the circumambulation, right? You're walking around it counterclockwise. There's a place that's called the Hatim that you've probably seen people pray in that area. And there's this curved wall, like in front of it, right? You can look up pictures of it. If we were facing the other way, I'd pull it up. Maybe we'll do that next time. But if you do a circuit of tawaf inside of the Hatim, your tawaf doesn't count. Because the Hatim is part of the original foundation of the Kaaba. So if you walk inside of it instead of around it, you've actually walked inside of the Kaaba. Does that make sense? So it's not a complete circuit because you're not walking around it, you're walking within it. Do you know? The Prophet tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that in that moment when he comes back to Mecca, he doesn't have like a lot of time left in the world, right? After the conquest of Mecca, which we're going to talk about like much later, if you all are here, inshallah, if I'm still here, right? We'll talk about like a year from now or a year and a half from now. It's after Medina, and like they come back, they take back the city of Mecca. The Prophet tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that if your people had not just recently left like this state of Jahiliyyah, then I would have added more to the Kaaba and rebuilt it back in its original form. But he says that he didn't do this for this reason, right? That they had just left this state of Jahiliyyah. What does this teach us, firstly? Do you know what I mean? He didn't come in devoid of an understanding of what humans are about, right? The Kaaba is no joke in Islam. There's opinions that say Adam alayhi salam was the first to build the Kaaba, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam was the first to build the Kaaba. This was the first house of worship. Maybe there were other houses, but this was the first that had this type of barakah to it. But it's like a pretty holy place, right? We can agree to this, right? Mecca is like a holy place, sanctified as a city, right? Right? Yeah, the answer is yes. Right? I like that you're laughing. Thank you. Thanks, Auntie. Yeah. So when we're sitting and trying to understand this, who's going to say anything to the messenger of God? He's come into Mecca and taken it back, conquest of Mecca. And they're all just watching him. And the reason he's telling his wife, I'm not doing this, these people wouldn't be able to handle. I don't want to cause them like pain. Do you get what I mean? It's not an obligation to do it. Do you understand? So there's a recognition of people and where they're at. You're not just throwing things at people. You have a sense of awareness that I'm like talking to someone, not at them. Do you get what I mean? This is where like advice, counsel, planning has strategy to it. So you're not getting like the convert Muslim to come in and said, oh, like I'll tell you, for example, a friend of mine, he, converted to Islam and had like crazy experience. I can tell you all kinds of stories. Allah make it easy and forgive us for what we do to people. This guy became Muslim in the masjid, and then they asked him like different kinds of questions. And one of the questions they asked him was like, do you have a girlfriend? And he said yes. And they said, you have to marry her now. You know, he had just converted to Islam. Do you get what I mean? Right? And he was like, these Muslim people are telling me to do this. I got to do this thing. So he converted, and then he married this lady, right? Wasn't even whether, like, it made sense for them to get married. He was like, you're Muslim, no girlfriend. You got a girlfriend, marry her, right? And he was like, this is what Islam says. This is what I got to do. This guy got divorced from this girl because later on, he was having dinner with her and his in-laws and his own parents. And he's like a light-skinned black man. But his father is a dark-skinned black man. And the in-laws said to the daughter, we didn't know he was black. And then they divorced. He shouldn't have been in that marriage in the first place. Do you get what I mean? Right? I sit down with some of these kids who convert. They've been Muslim for like 5 minutes, and they talk to other people who are born into it. You cannot give somebody something you do not possess. And you have to think, if you don't believe Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, maybe you're not the person to be giving people Islam. I remember a young woman who sat in my office in the middle of August, is dripping sweat. She's got a scully on that you wear in the winter, and a hoodie sweatshirt and a scarf. And she's been Muslim for like 2 weeks. I said, what are you doing, right? It's August. Why are you dressed like it's snowing outside? And she said, my mother hates Islam. She found out I converted. She beats me. And these 2 kids who are my classmates who are Muslim said, now that I'm a Muslim woman, first thing I have to do is start wearing a hijab. And she's like, I can't wear this scarf that I want to because my mother will literally hits me. And she's like, so this is all I know what to do right now, right? Make it make sense. Do you understand? The Prophet here is telling Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, I wanted to do this, but I didn't because your people, they were just recently out of this state, right? There's a man by the name of Sunan Qudus. Do people know who Sunan Qudus is? From the Wali Sango, right? If you come from Indonesia or Malaysia, these are the people who bring Islam to this part of the world. The Wali Sango come, and they're dealing with demographic and population that in their religion, theologically, they venerate like animals, and one of them is the cow. And Sunan Qudus tells his people, we're not going to eat beef anymore. He doesn't say it's haram to eat beef, right? And this is Islam principally. Just because something's allowed doesn't mean you have to do it, right? You're allowed to eat a hamburger. It doesn't mean you're obligated to eat a hamburger. Do you see the difference, right? You're obligated to pray Fajr. You're not obligated to eat a steak. Do you know, right? You're allowed to eat a steak. You're not allowed to miss Fajr. Do you see the difference? And then they also were taking good care of animals. Everybody in those countries are Muslim now, right? You go to Indonesia, you go to Malaysia, they still have their challenges, don't get me wrong, but the mechanisms that were being brought through are rooted in this idea. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And here the Prophet is telling his wife, they just came out of this. He didn't want to make it harder for them, right? You have to do that for others. We're not making excuses. You can't change it. On Monday night, we go through the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi. We're just talking about principles of bid'ah and what this means, etc., right? You're not allowed to change the religion, right? What's fard is fard. What's haram is haram. That's it. People can struggle with it. Do you know what I mean? And there's like a learning mode that we want people to go through. But there's still a sense of understanding of where people are coming from. It's not just let me throw stuff at people in ways that I'm not conscious of what it will actually be doing to them. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. Okay. And so here now, the Prophet wants to do this. Why is this important? Because Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she hears the Prophet say this thing. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she has a sister named Asma. Asma bint Abi Bakr. Asma bint Abi Bakr has a son by the name of Abdullah. This is why the kunya given to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is Abdullah. Not because she has her own son named Abdullah, but one of the opinions is that because her sister's son, meaning her nephew, who is her mahram, is Abdullah, and she wanted to have this type of name, she asked the Prophet, and she became Abdullah. Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair, who is Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha's nephew, he hears Aisha say that the Prophet said, I would want to rebuild the Kaaba in this way. So from the time that the Prophet rebuilds the Kaaba, 35 years of age, and it's in this set that's not the original foundation, Abdullah ibn Zubair, he then builds it the way that the Prophet wanted to have it built. So it takes now a different rebuilding. Prior to this, from the time that Ibrahim alayhis salam builds this to the time when the Prophet's 35 years of age, there's a few times that different tribes rebuild it because it just gets worn down. Here, Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair is purposefully rebuilding it because he knows this hadith. He knows what his aunt has told him the Prophet said. He wants to do what the Prophet said to do. There's a man by the name of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. People heard of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf? Huh? Al-Thaqafi. Yeah. Who is he?
I think he was, I'm not sure, but he was like a bad person.
Yeah, he did like a lot of messed up stuff. You know, not doing good things at all. Do you know what I mean? He was the first person to clothe the Kaaba, right? That still stays in that way till it's today. This kind of outer covering that we see on it. But Al-Hajjaj, he was just like a very ruthless, tyrannical person. He kills Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair. And one of the things that he says to the Khalifa of that time is, should I just put this Kaaba back the way it was before this companion of the Prophet like changed it, right? He doesn't say companion of the Prophet, I'm saying that. But this is what you got to understand. When there's a shift away from the foundations rooted in integrity, character, honesty, dignity, not of just the self, but of the other, you see now movements where there's literally people who validate and justify the massacre of the Prophet's family, the killing of the grandson of the Prophet of God, right? And here now, Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair is the nephew of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. Her kunya is Abdullah, the mother of this man. Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf kills this man. And then he says to the Khalifa, should we put it back? Neither of them know the hadith. Does it make sense? But they're doing something that impacts the religious epicenter of the Muslim world. Not good to make decisions around religion if you don't know religion. Right? Not good. Do you know? Because Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair is not doing what he feels like doing. He's doing what the Prophet told Aisha that he wanted to do in that instance. And so now it stays like in this place. Harun al-Rashid becomes the Khalifa sometime later. And he asks Imam Malik, should we restructure this? Imam Malik, rahimahullah, who is the namesake of one of the four major schools of Sunni legal thought, the Maliki school, he's said to be the shining star of Medina, that the hadith says that there will come this scholar that will be the shining star of Medina. The people say it's Imam Malik, rahimahullah. Very humble, right? Knowledgeable, knows so much. A famous incident with him is that someone comes to him from a far distance to ask 40 questions, and to 36 of them he says, I don't know. And the man says, you are Imam Malik, right? Like the knowledgeable Imam Malik. Like, I came from far, and you saying he said I don't know to 36 out of 40 questions. He's like, I don't know. He's not trying to play games. It's not a game. Everything has accountability to it, right? Every single word. This guy vetoing a resolution that everybody else is in favor of, and he's raising his hand up in the sky, that hand is going to testify on the day of judgment. Every eye that has seen that is going to testify on the day of judgment that they saw it. You have to decide whether you believe this or not. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't need for us to believe it in order for it to be true. So it's in our best interest to get it together and say, hey man, do I really buy into this thing or not? Is Islam to me just having an Arabic name and making converts' lives hell and being in a place where I just whatever? No, it's about a moral philosophy on life. It's something that makes your heart your treasure and allows for you to live in a world that even outwardly feels like it's just agitated, but inwardly you still have balance and tranquility. And so Imam Malik, he tells Harun al-Rashid, look, this is the Kaaba. We can't be playing games with the Kaaba. So because the Prophet did not change it, had he changed it to its original foundation and said this is what it must be, that would be different. But the Prophet let it be in that state that was what it was, with it being a smaller shaped Kaaba. Imam Malik said, we don't want this because there's going to be people that will come who are in leadership and they're just going to turn it into whatever it is that they want to at that point. It's not a joke. Accountability, fundamental value in this religion. Precedent, something that these people are constantly thinking about. Do you know what I mean? And you have to think about it in a way that's not about burdensomeness within your own lived identity, but if you tell somebody something is okay, then that's something you have to deal with. Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anh, when they take Jerusalem and the keys are given to him, he doesn't pray in the church in Jerusalem. Why does he not pray in the church in Jerusalem? Why?
Did he say he knew that some extremists would come inevitably and convert the church?
He doesn't say extremists. Yeah. But yeah, this is what he says, right?
Might be emotionally considerate of whatever the people is going through, because they have this city and this the church where they practice their religion, and then you're just taking over.
Yeah, and this is what he says, right? If he was to pray in the church, then all these Muslims would come and start praying in the church. Who prays in the church? It doesn't mean a Muslim cannot pray in the church. We have more leeway than any of the Abrahamic traditions about praying in these other. We can pretty much pray in most places, right? Orthodox Jews cannot even enter into a Catholic church. Do you know what I mean? Right? But he's saying, if he was to start praying in this place, who's it going to make it hard for? Because he's Umar ibn al-Khattab, right? لَكَانَ نَبِيًّا بَعْدِي لَكَانَ عُمَرٌ. That if there was a messenger after me, it would be this man Umar. He expands the Muslim community multifold under his caliphate. Do you know what I'm saying? They will follow his precedent. So he's setting the precedent that is conscious of the fact that if he does it, all these people are going to also do it too. He doesn't want these churches to get filled with all these Muslims and to then disrupt like the church's activities. Do you see what I mean? Right? Imam Malik is telling Harun al-Rashid the same thing. You cannot play games. People are going to come and they're going to think it's like their toy, that they could do with it whatever it is that they want to. Do you see what I mean? Right? And so essentially the Kaaba maintains itself in what it is that we see in terms of like that shape, right? The Hatim is still not kind of part of the larger edifice, do you know? And you still have to walk around it in this way. There's other times too, flooding, different things happen, rebuilt in this way and that way. But it's essentially now keeping this form that we have here. But what you want to remember is that when the Prophet came into Mecca and he had like the decision to make, do we do this? He tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that these people just came out of this state of ignorance, right? That he's not trying to like ruin their lives. You know what I mean? Right? He's in this place where he has this understanding of things. Okay, so let's do this. If you could turn to the persons next to you, just in the conversation on a whole, what are some of the things that you're taking away from tonight's discussion, things that are coming up? We'll talk about it for a bit and then just make a couple of announcements and then we'll wrap up for tonight, inshallah. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things that we're taking away from today? What's coming up for people? What do we think? Maybe we get a couple people before we wrap up. Yeah.
Talking to my buddy here. Since I started coming to the IC, and I have a job, so I'm surrounded by people who are not Muslim that are very curious about Islam. They have so many questions, but they're like very micro questions. They're not like the broad aspect of Islam. I'm getting really, really comfortable with just saying I don't know. Just to not make it seem like I know everything or I'm the face of Islam. I just met a convert friend this summer. I never had a friend who converted to Islam. So he always asks me questions. And I'm just like, buddy, I don't know. And I don't know why I do that. I don't know. And I don't feel embarrassed saying that because like what you're saying, I'm not like innovating anything. I'm not misleading anyone. I'm just a Muslim guy just trying to figure it out. So
Yeah, amazing. You don't have to know,
everything.
like, in order to do. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like when you fast, you just don't eat anything, you know? Don't drink anything. You don't have to know like where, why. It's a very passive act, but it's purposeful. A universal, huh?
I'm sorry.
But it's like the universality of the religion is something that if it claims to be for all people from all backgrounds, there's literally people talking about the Seerah right now, sitting in Nigeria, sitting in Indonesia, sitting in Turkey, sitting in Scotland. Do you know what I mean? All of these people and everyone like beyond their borders can be Muslim if they want to be. It can't be something that is built on the idea that every single one of us has to know every single thing in these ways. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And it's liberating when you can yield to that. Because then it also comes to this place of like, I just do it because God tells me to do it, you know? And I'm good with that. I don't need something else, right? And it can be boggling to people's minds, but when you allow for them to respect you for actually being true to your identity and not having to pretend that you are something that you're not, the opportunity for understanding comes a little bit more. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Other thoughts, other things coming up for people as we're wrapping up? Yeah.
Something we talked about, there were two things, one just on my mind. The one thing that I can remember, we were just talking about the fact that the Prophet had that foresight. So in both instances where he could have had thought crushed, right? He was like, the future generations might believe. If I was in that situation, I probably would have had it crushed. But, you know, the fact that he had that, and then obviously what you were just saying with the conquest of Mecca, like really, when you come back to that, you pretty much could have done whatever, but to think that, like, he didn't want to make things more difficult than they already were for those people, I think a takeaway for us was that both to implement that foresight and also just to slow down in our actions also, like, to take that even when we're talking to people, right? So maybe don't respond to that text right away, maybe take a breath before you speak, like, don't be so quick, because you want to be able to see how it's going to impact the other side.
Yeah, 100%. Right? And look at the kind of contemporary comparison that we have right now. These guys literally are just indiscriminately giving in to base desire and ego, devastating and destroying like people's lives, infrastructure, like everything. Do you know what I mean? And you juxtapose it to someone going in and it's just everyone's good. Like there's no bloodshed today. Do you see? Right? And you have to think about it not as a story, but as an actual historically lived experience. And what the nature is of humanity, most men, they don't stop, right? They don't take a breath. They don't think. They just act on impulse. They do what the physical commands them to do, what the ego commands them to, in this false sense of egotistical pride. May Allah protect us from it. So you want to, like, both believe in and believe the messenger of God, and then just try your best to do what he says. Do you know what I mean? And then when you believe him, like if you're actually trying, right, then you will believe in a God that is merciful and compassionate. And if you make a slip, that's okay. You just get back up again and you try again. You know? You don't justify like horrendousness, because most of us aren't doing horrendous things. Do you know? But we're able to at least kind of experience what the religion allows for us to, because we're approaching it in the way that it was intended to be, a combination of all these variables: practice, ritual, theology, spirituality, ethics, all synergized, combined together. And when the Prophet is called Insan al-Kamil, right, that he is like the kind of complete human being. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's still human. His completedness is in his humanness. Do you understand? Right? It's not something that has any element of deification to it in any way. He is a complete person. And that's where there's a tangible opportunity for role modeling and examples. Do you get what I mean? Okay. So a couple of quick things. Next week, I'm supposed to be going to Egypt on Monday, but I'm supposed to be landing Wednesday at 9 a.m. So, inshallah, that'll be the case. And then next week will be the last halaqah that we do until after January 12th. Because then our building is closed from next Friday, the 22nd. We close at 7 p.m. And we will resume some hours of operation after New Year's here. But the IC has an Umrah trip that I'll be going on from January 3rd to the 12th. Some of you are part of it. If you still want to join it, tomorrow's the deadline. And so that's when you got to get all your stuff in by and sign up and whatever. And then we'll be back here then the following week, which I think will be the 17th. Like, we'll resume again on that Wednesday, this halaqah. There'll still be other things going on. We have a winter clothing drive happening. And so all these boxes that are here are filled with jackets and blankets. And if you can imagine, yesterday or 2 days ago, we had like probably a third of the amount of these boxes already go in someone's car. And this stuff is just what we've gotten in the last couple of days, or since last Friday. Well over like clothing for more than 1,000 people so far, mashallah, right? May Allah bless us and increase this community and its generosity. But it's remarkable. Like, I'm shocked sometimes at just how giving people are. If you want to give to this, it's got to be by this Friday. So please bring something if you want to by Friday. Don't bring it after Friday, because it'll just be tougher for us. So if you show up next Wednesday and you're like, hey, I brought this thing, right? I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be in Egypt. So you could deal with Amira and explain to her why you brought something after the deadline. But bring it on Friday if you can. And if you miss that deadline, we can just tell you where to take the stuff also, right? It doesn't stop. There's 100,000 plus migrants and asylum seekers right now in New York City alone, many of whom are Muslim. Even if they weren't Muslim, we as Muslims should still be helping them. And just to give you an idea of what the reality is, because a lot of you live in Brooklyn and in Midtown, and we send out these emails, people are responding back, yeah, I see lines of these people, standing out there. What do you think they're doing in the lines? As they're trying to get food, they're trying to get shelter, or like just jackets and whatever else. What's going to happen for a lot of them, because of the nature of infrastructure in the city, when we have these realities that we take a passive approach to, and funding is going mostly into securitization and law enforcement and military apparatus, these types of services suffer. And so a lot of these people right now in this cold weather, when you walk outside right now, it's going to be 30 something degrees, and the real feel is going to be even less than that. May Allah make it easy for us. In a lot of these shelters, you don't get like a shelter forever, especially when you're a migrant, asylum seeker, who the world could care less about you. Do you get what I mean? One of the reasons why you see long lines of men, for example, is because if you have a family and you're a woman with kids and you got a husband, you're not going to take your kids and go out and stand in the middle of the cold. The young man in the family is going to go do that, right? So a lot of those guys also have families. You just don't see them, but you want to be able to see. This is what we talk about, right? What is unseen, and take your mind to this place. When they finish with the allocated days that they have in a shelter, that is usually up to 30 days, they have to stand in line again to get this. When you have 100,000 plus people, many of whom are just sleeping in the streets because there's no room in the shelter, what some will do after they lose their spot, they go and wait in line, and the line is the equivalent of, like, if you've ever seen people line up for like concert tickets, or they line up for a Black Friday sale and they're out there for 3 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours. These guys are standing in line and don't want to give up their spot in line, because then they lose a spot in a place that is indoors. So a lot of them are getting hypothermia. We had a man who reached out to us some time ago who had hypothermia, was in his 60s, and he said to me, subhanAllah, like being in the hospital where they took him for his hypothermia was something that he also found benefit in, because he said, prior to this, I hadn't eaten any food for 5 days. Do you get what I mean? You can't fundamentally understand what it's like unless you've lived in that place. So it's not, they're just standing in line and everything is la-di-da. So all we're asking is, if you have some stuff that you don't necessarily need, that's clean and in good condition, that you can bring in and wash it so that we give people. When I went to Morocco and asked people what do they want, they said, you know, we don't just need shelter, we need shelter with dignity to it. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So tell your friends, tell other people, bring some stuff. We have like things that will give to 1,000 people, but then there's still like 99,000 other people that need stuff, right? And that's what we want to think about, that there's a benefit to doing for those that we're doing for, but there's no shortage of people that can be done for right now. Do you know what I mean? And a few months from now, if we got to do it again, because you got to think, you know, if you don't have a place to stay, you got to carry all your stuff with you all the time. This is why we got bags for people, right? What happens if your blanket gets wet? What are you going to do? And the kind of water that it gets wet with is not just like snow, but like sewage and whatever else, you know? And when people don't have a theology that sanctifies life, they teach us to then erase and not even notice the people that are there. Do you know what I mean? And so people will have to make decisions like, it's getting colder and we can't continue to carry all this stuff because I got to carry my baby, so I got to let go of this blanket, and maybe the jacket will just help. Do you know what I mean? Or if you've like you wear gloves, not 24/7 winter gloves, right? You only wear them when you're outside. What if you're outside 24/7? They're not made to endure like a month of just sleeping on the street. It's going to get worn down as it deteriorates and gets wet and whatever else. So after you give, you got to think like, I got to give some more. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? We're also running a campaign for when I go to Egypt on Monday, where the organizations we're going with, they have been given the green light to send trucks with aid over the border into Gaza, right? May Allah make things easy and end the occupations taking place there. So again, same notion. Do you know what I mean? We put up a crowdfunding last night, like right around this time. It's already got more than $300,000 on it, mashallah, from over 1,400 people. I need all of you to take the link and share it with everybody and tell them, like, this is stuff that we know is going across the border. I'm literally going there to pack these trucks. You know what I'm saying? And what we're leveraging here is the trust that people have in our community. A segue into what we were talking about before as an individual is that when you have the blessing of being in a space where the notoriety of your space is that people know that your community is generous and it's a place people could turn to in a time of need, then you can by extension pick up and acquire that characteristic by being a part of the process. Do you get what I'm saying? There's going to only be so many times I can spread to the networks I have access to. Here's this thing, give it to it. But if every single one of you in this room was also sharing it again and again and again, that number would go up manyfold. Do you get what I mean? Right? Launchgood.com/aid to Gaza now. That's the link. It's on my social media. It's on emails that we sent out yesterday. You could just Google like this random combination of words as an intelligent person to find it if you can't like figure it out, but push it around. Do you know? We had a young woman in our community. She graduated in 2008. Her name is Aqsa Durrani. She's a doctor. She worked with Doctors Without Borders, the World Health Organization. She's now here in New York. And in COVID, Ibtihaj Muhammad had asked me if I could help with a COVID fundraiser for a dialysis center in Africa for her Quran teacher. And there was some like kind of confusion with the people who were organizing this with her. And so they said, can you just send the link out? And I was like, of course, right? So I just shared it. If you're in my phone book and you get spammed with my WhatsApp messages, I sent out this Zoom link to everybody. And then Aqsa was in Africa. And she said, what's crazy is tonight, a 6-year-old girl that's been my patient for a couple of weeks is going to die from the condition that you are raising funds for, this center you're raising funds for. And I said to her, Aqsa, you know what's remarkable? Is not that you're there in that place providing medical care only, but what do you think the parents of this little girl would have thought if there was no doctor who cared enough to even stand with them in their daughter's last minutes? Do you see what I mean? So even if one of our sisters and brothers is going to become shaheed throughout this atrocity against them, but in their last days we give them a tent to sleep in. In their last days we bring them some soap to wash their clothes with. We give them some of these things that they haven't had for some time, let alone those that will inshallah survive this. That's what we're doing, and that's what you're choosing to do or not do when you share in your entire address. I don't know how many people's phone numbers I have. I send it to everybody all the time. There's no reason you can't do it if I can do it. Do you get what I mean? You can spread it to your friends, your family members, everybody. We can get 1,000 of these things by sending out some emails and spreading the word in a cursory way. What if everybody felt empowered to just start inviting people to what's good? This is what dawah is also. Do you get what I mean? You're calling to Allah not abstractly, but you're calling to the goodness of Islam. So if you really buy into this thing, like why would it not happen? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So please share that link and like push it as far as you can so that we can do what we can to help people right now in real time, because not every organization has this green light right now, and so we want to take advantage of it. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a pause here. Inshallah, we'll see everybody next Wednesday. On Friday, I forgot, we're doing a open mic with the Muslim Writers Collective in our IC Professionals group. That's going to start at 7 in the lecture hall in the basement, the theater space. So come to that if you can. I think there's a $5 ticket price. If you can't like cover the $5, let us know. We'll take care of it. But try to come to that. If you can, it's going to be one of our last main events for this month.
Tomorrow, Thoughtful Thursday.
Yeah, if you're a student here, Dr. Tara Gore, one of our staff psychologists, is going to be doing a program in the afternoon called Thoughtful Thursdays, so come out for that. And then Friday we'll have lunch after Jummah as well. Okay, so we'll see everyone, inshallah.
So is this
Assalamu alaikum.
Seerah next, you're here or you're in
Next Wednesday we'll have this class.
You will
Yeah,
be-
inshallah. Yeah, inshallah.
Egypt is the following week, I guess?
I'll be landing at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, so then I'll come back. Yeah.